health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to Accelerated Health TV and Radio Show. I'm your host, Sara Banta. I'm a health coach, natural supplement expert, and a busy mom of three. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below so you're notified every week with my new podcast on Mondays and Tuesdays. And if you haven't already, join my free group coaching on Telegram with the link below. I teach you on a daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health, and you will be a part of an amazing, like-minded group to support you on your journey in addition to truly taking control of your health. My goal is to reach everyone on earth with eyes to see and ears to hear my message of healing. So help me with that goal. Share this podcast with a few of your friends who may need my help. I am so excited about today's topic and our guest, who is an expert. We're talking about family culture. And Katie Wells is a mom of 6 with a background in journalism. She took health into her own hands and started researching to find answers to her own health struggles. And her research turned into a blog and a podcast. She is the OG. As she's writing this, she wouldn't tell you that she has written over 1,500 articles, 3 books, and was named one of the 100 most influential people in health and wellness. And I've been listening to her for a very long time. Welcome, Katie. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited about this topic because as a mom of 3, it all starts in the home. And, my mom is, she had 4 kids. I come from 4. And I said, Mom, 4 kids, that's a lot. And she said, Sara, after 3, it's just a lot. It doesn't matter whether it's 4 or 6 or 8, but they start taking care of themselves, right? So I'm super excited to jump into this topic because we're focused a lot on our own health, our husband's health, testosterone, menopause, eating organic, all of this stuff. And I know so many people that say, oh, but my kids eat goldfish and they're fine. Kids can do whatever they want because their bodies can handle it. And we are now in a pandemic of our children's health and their anxiety levels, the ADHD, depression, suicide, leaky gut, all of that stuff. And it all starts in the home. So I want to dive into creating that healthy family culture and what that means. So welcome. And I want to first start out with what got you into this, Katie? What drove you into creating the blog, reaching out to help others, and also being a mom of 6? You obviously have plenty to do on the side.
Well, thank you again for having me. And my sort of origin story of Wellness Mama actually lines up directly with what you just said, because I hear that from people all the time, like, well, I ate that stuff and I turned out fine, or kids are resilient, they can handle it. And while there is an element of truth in that, certainly kids are very resilient, and so are adults. And I very much believe the body is designed and adapted to heal, and it wants to. At the same time, like you said, we're facing this pandemic of rising health issues in every age group, but I would say most alarmingly now in kids. And for me, that was kind of when I started to really turn my research side to the health world, was shortly after my first child was born. I was actually sitting in the doctor's office at the follow-up appointment for that. And of course, doctors who deliver babies often are on a tight schedule and running late because babies come when they come. So I was waiting for a long time, and I had read through pretty much everything in the waiting room while I was just waiting and nursing my son. And I believe it was Time magazine. I was reading through an article and it said, for the first time in 2 centuries, the current generation of American children will have a shorter life expectancy than their parents. So we are witnessing the generation at which that tide is turning. And it was really alarming, all of the statistics that have actually gotten worse since then of what kids of that generation would face. And at the same time, I was starting to have health struggles. And I say in hindsight, like if you want to create autoimmune disease, I figured out the perfect way to do it. Just be really stressed, eat really crappy food all the way through college, don't sleep enough, and burn the candle at all ends. And that was kind of what I had created inadvertently in my own life. And then pregnancy was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. So on a personal level, that began my journey of what ended up being 8 years of trying to figure out what was going on with my own health. And at the same time, deciding in that moment, reading those words in the waiting room, that that wasn't okay for my child and it wasn't okay for anyone's child. And I also think that moms especially have a tremendous amount of power in the ability to shift that, because moms are an absolute force of nature. And not only do we make most of the purchasing decisions, so we have a very real way to vote with our dollars, but more importantly, we're the ones directly hands-on raising the next generation. And so those habits and foundational skills that we build for them from an early age and model and build into our family culture, I think are one of the biggest needle movers in being able to shift those statistics for our own kids and for society as a whole. So every day I'm deeply grateful I get to be in this amazing community of moms and speak to moms, because I think moms have the most power to affect change in these areas. And I also think, to your point, it all does go back to the home and to the culture that we're creating in our homes. And I think there's multiple approaches there, and we can go whatever direction you'd like. But I think the mindset and family culture piece is actually the primary one. And then there's certainly a lot that you talk about so well on what to do once we have that culture figured out in building those healthy habits and the specifics of what those are and the individualization and what changes for each of us, because we are each so unique. But I think that family culture piece is kind of really where it starts. And I also, the jokes abound about babies don't come with an instruction manual. And that's true. And a lot of us, once we jump into motherhood, we are managing so many details. We're managing a household, a family, often working as well. And we're managing all of that in our head. And I often encourage moms to take a step back and take a 10,000-foot view and be intentional about building the family culture, especially around health habits, but around our mindset, around all of those things. Because I think that goes a long way toward also addressing things like overwhelm in moms and stress. And that it's not actually often all of the things we have to do that are our cause of stress, but the management of all of those things in our head, or being solely responsible for the emotional labor of that. Even if other people in the household are tactically helping, often moms are still managing the emotional burden of all of it. And so that's why I love to start with a culture first approach and build all of those core tenets into the culture. And then the habits and the healthy lifestyle naturally come as a result of that, versus something that we're having to devote like brain power and willpower to on a daily basis.
What's so interesting is my youngest is the age of your oldest. And there was a shift in the hospital and how they dealt with me, just from my 21-year-old down to my 17-year-old. And what they did, I'll just say vaccine related, without asking. So that just is something that has already shifted and is quickly shifting. And this time has shifted where you need to be even more intentional. And I love the word intentional, because you have to be intentional with your parenting. Just like you said, I have my babysitter. It's super funny. My babysitter, who babysat my kids when they were 1, 3, and 5, is now having kids that are 1, 3, and 5. And she's texting me saying, Sarah, I'm so afraid to raise these kids in this age. How did you do it? Your kids are so well grounded in this world of wokeness and everything. How are they? And I said, Miranda, you're going to be fine, because it's all within the home. And when you're intentional with your parenting, your kids are going to have the values that you instill in them. But you've got to do it when they're young. And so that's where I want to get into your first most imperative, non-negotiable parenting principles. What would they be?
Absolutely. And to build on what you just said also, I think I say often on my podcast that we are each our own primary healthcare provider, and that the responsibility, of course, lies within us. And for moms, we're also the primary healthcare providers for our children, because it's all of our daily habits and choices that actually build our health. It's not the 5 minutes in a doctor's office. And I think the best outcomes happen when we have great partners in that and practitioners who have very specific knowledge and can help. But I like to always remind people on the health side, the responsibility is still within each of us. And as moms, that applies to our children as well. But also, like you said, to the mindset piece, when in both the education and the parenting side, I try to think in first principles whenever possible. And I feel like this isn't often applied to parenting, but I think it actually simplifies things a whole lot if we take a first principles approach. And for people who aren't familiar with that term, it basically means simplifying something to its absolute core pieces and then building from there, like distilling them to the point at which they cannot be further distilled. So when I did that with parenting, what tops the list for me in my approach with my kids, and that sort of governs all the decisions below that, is the idea that each of them are their own infinite autonomous being. They are not an extension of me. They are not a part of me. They are each their own infinite autonomous being. And that lets the family culture be built and the decisions be made from that perspective, in honoring and valuing their autonomy, in realizing that the goal of parenting is not to raise children, it's to raise adults who are hopefully doing something positive in society. And that doesn't begin when they're teenagers, that begins day one. And of course, there's a sliding scale where they need a lot more hands-on help and involvement at young ages. And then that gradually goes down over time, so that by the time they're older teenagers, they are essentially already self-sufficient adults who might still live in our home. But there's a whole lot of course, micro decisions that go between that. And I think if we approach parenting with that as the first principle and in the forefront, it helps really shape even our day-to-day interactions with them, because it's not that I'm dictating behaviors and health culture and everything within the home. It's that we're co-creating this culture together, and that each of these infinite autonomous beings that lives in my house is contributing to that. And in little ways, that helps, for instance, with the idea that mom's responsible for everything in the house. And if they do anything in the house, they're helping me. And instead, that moves into a mindset of we are all contributing to this together and building this together. And your input is as important as mine. And you are your own infinite autonomous being, just like I am. And so I feel like it brings a level of respect to those conversations, and also reinforces the importance of modeling, which I know you talk about as well. But what we say to our kids hopefully does get through sometimes, but they really, especially at young ages, pay so much more attention to what we do. And so whether it be in the health world with the habits we model there, whether it be in how we show up regulated, hopefully in our nervous system, in our interactions with them. I love that sort of conscious parenting piece is entering the parenting conversation more and more these days. But even just the simple idea, if they're their own infinite autonomous being, I'm going to treat them as such, and I'm not going to meet their dysregulation at times with my own dysregulation, which will then just amplify the dysregulation in the household. As a side note, I think it was really fascinating when I learned that when kids are really little, like before age 7, they not only don't have a fully regulated nervous system, obviously, but their nervous system actually depends a lot on the parents. And that's how they develop their own nervous system, is through direct physical interactions with the parent. And so in a very real way, a mom's nervous system sort of sets the tone for the entire household. And so I think also like one of the best gifts we can give our kids is our own self-regulation and being able to show up calm and collected and be a safe space for them to feel emotions without giving them big emotions back all the time, and help them learn through that safety net that there's a difference between the emotions you feel and the actions you choose to do, but your emotions are okay. And I'm a safe space for you to feel your emotions. And let's talk about any actions you might choose to do as a result of feeling a certain emotion, but help them develop that framework from an early age. And I think when we operate from that place, all of the smaller decisions around health or parenting or anything become so much easier because we're operating from the first principles.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Number one, to highlight what you were just saying with that nervous system transference to the kids, it is so important for us moms to take care of our mental health, to take care of ourselves so that we can show up in a calm manner, because so many women are running around with adrenal fatigue and just like, you know, just going through the motions. And when the kid's in the way, then they just flip out or react in a way that is hurtful and not productive with the child. So you're saying all of these things about how to raise autonomous kids. What does that look like? Like, people are listening thinking, and I know what you're saying, because I look at each one of my kids and they're very different. They didn't come with a handbook. And I always joke with my eldest, my 21-year-old, I'm like, I should be in jail for the mistakes that I've made with you. And thank God I have fixed it all by child number 3, because I've learned, right? And now, Katie, you're going to learn in a couple of years, when your kids go off to college, that they come home with even more independence and more opinions, and you have to change your parenting to a parent adult kids to create a different relationship, which is a whole new chapter that I'm learning. But what does that look like? What does it look like when you are creating this relationship with these autonomous beings in your household that are very different from each other, but that are growing up in a respectful way? You're not being a dictator as a mom, but you're also, there is discipline, and that's a fine balance. So what does that look like?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. When you figure out how to parent one child, I would say, first of all, you never fully figure it out, but also you've only figured out that child. And just like in health, the blueprint that worked for me is not going to be directly applied and work for you. It's so true with our kids as well. I do think like I said, there's like a sliding scale. You're right. Kids, especially little ones, need to understand boundaries, because toddlers are wired to figure out where the boundaries are, because that creates a feeling of safety. But the inverse of that is teenagers are wired to become independent. Like, that's wired into their biology, and it's important. So the same boundaries that make a toddler feel safe are going to make a teenager want to push against them, because that's what they're wired. And so it's learning that scale and shifting that balance within the different ages in between, so that the same boundaries that help them feel safe as a toddler now are not a source of rebellion when they're teenagers. On a practical level, for me, this looks like, if we're operating from the principle that they're each their own infinite autonomous being, that means that it would actually be an insult to their autonomy for me to do everything for them once they're capable of doing it. So at the younger ages, this looks like evaluating based on their own ability and capacity at the time, but what are they actually capable of doing if I'm not trying to be a control freak and manage every aspect of their life, and then keeping the rule for myself that I won't do things for them once they're capable of doing it. And I always give the caveat, because moms will get upset. That doesn't mean I don't braid my daughter's hair just because they're capable of braiding it. That's still a bonding activity. So like connection exempt from that rule, but that means that by age 4, my kids have been able to do their own laundry. And so they do. And I don't do it for them because they're capable. And it would be an insult to them for me to, by my actions, infer that I'm better at that than they are just because I'm an adult. And so in those little ways, as they're capable, handing off the responsibility and that ownership and that power for these things in their daily lives to them, that help build their autonomy and their self-sufficiency and their ownership of those pieces of their lives. We also have a saying in our house, I think it's from Spider-Man actually originally, that with great power comes great responsibility, but I reverse it. And I tell them from a young age, with great responsibility comes great power. And we have very open conversations. I'm like, I have no desire to restrict your freedom, your ability, your autonomy. And in fact, I want to be your biggest supporter. I will always be in your corner for that. And to the degree that you show me through your actions that you are responsible, you will get the freedom that correlates to that, because I have no desire to limit you. And I think the conversations around that, and the fact that since a very young age, they've been able to be responsible for aspects of their lives and learn by trial and error in small ways, and occasionally ruining a load of laundry, but then learning how to fix it, they have more confidence in their ability to make good decisions. And so by the time my oldest 3 as teenagers now have very few boundaries and rules that I enforce, and I find they actually are more disciplined within themselves than I would be externally if I were making the rules. But they're getting to make those choices. I also think with kids at any age, anytime a choice comes internally from them versus externally regulated or mandated from me, it's a more powerful choice. So even when it comes to like food decisions, I try to build that in from a young age. And so I do often get asked, like, what does the food situation look like in your house? And do you let your kids eat things when they're out other places? And so I try to approach that from a first principles way as well and say, I look at the breakdown of responsibility there. Like, as their parent, I'm responsible for making sure in our house we have enough nutrient dense food available when they're hungry. Even from a young age, they're responsible for listening to their bodies and eating when they're hungry and not eating when they're not hungry. So we don't have battles around finishing the food on their plate. If they tell me they're not hungry, I trust them. Even if what they're actually saying is, I don't like this food that you made for dinner, they still have the option not to eat it, because I want them to learn to listen to their bodies, not to be mandated by me what they eat or don't eat. And the other part of that is that when they're not here, like, I'm not going to make junk food in our house, but if they're not in my house, it's their responsibility to decide what they're going to eat or not eat. So I don't label foods as bad. I don't mandate that they can never eat a cupcake at a birthday party. They get to make those choices. And just like with ruining a load of laundry, sometimes they choose to eat something I would not have prepared at home, and they don't feel great. And then they get that data on their own body and they learn from a young age. And I think my hope in that is that it also avoids creating rebellion or anything around food where it's enticing only because it's forbidden. Like, I think back as just a funny topical example, I wasn't allowed to get my ears pierced until I was 13. And so piercings became much more appealing than they otherwise would have been. And when I was 18, at one point, I think I had 33 piercings. And then I realized one day, like, these hurt. I can't sleep on my ear for 6 months after I get these. Why do I don't actually like them? Why do I keep doing this? And realized it was because I wasn't allowed to. And so I've been aware of that and trying not to create false dichotomies or artificial reasons that my kids would want to push back against something, or sort of like not creating the inverse by trying to create the good thing. And so I think those little decisions actually are the most meaningful when they're youngest, because they're wired for independence as they get older. And yours are older than mine, so I know you've seen this even to a further degree than I have. And so realizing if we wait till they're teenagers to start trying to have those conversations and hand off their independence to them, we've already missed the window where they actually want to listen to us and they want to help around the house and they want to learn those things and they care what we say. And that it's natural and healthy and good that they want to be independent when they're teenagers. So not waiting until that point to start instilling all of these things.
Oh my gosh, we have so much in common. I was not allowed to get my ears pierced except until I was 10. However, I had a haircut that made me look like a boy. So at 9 years old, my mom finally let me get my ears pierced. So with my girls, I actually, when I said, when you're ready to take care of your ears, I'm happy to go with you and I'll get an extra one pierced, an extra piercing with you. And we did. With the food, first of all, with the laundry, I want to commend you. My kids all do their laundry, but it wasn't at 4 years old. That is phenomenal. My two kids are in college, and both kids, when they went as a freshman, the amount of kids in that freshman dorm that have never done a load of laundry it was huge. And my kids were the ones teaching them how to do their laundry. My kids all do their laundry now. And the food thing, all three of my kids had health issues when they were young, and they were very different. One had learning issues, one had gut issues, and my son had leukemia. So three very different issues, but it was those three separate issues that I used as tools to teach them why we want to take care of our body and the food we eat, and taking that time to teach the kids about food and why, because I don't think a lot of kids out there know why you don't want to eat processed foods. They just know that that's normal, and the person to their left and right are eating those processed foods at lunch, so that's normal and that's what we should do. But when you teach them, they then connect the brain and body, the health, the way they feel to the food. And then that ownership is there. And it's not just blaming it on mom or dad that I'm not allowed to eat this or I'm allowed to eat this. And I had my kids make their lunches since they were very young in elementary school. And there was one day when my son brought his lunch home, and he had hardly eaten any of it, and it was fourth grade. And I said, "Oh, bud, you got to eat your lunch." And he said, "Mom, at least I don't throw it away like all of my friends." So Their friends had no connection to their food, right? They made their parents sent their lunch with them. They threw it away so they could go play on the playground, or they stole the other kids, candy bar in their lunch, and that was it. There was no connection from body to food and health. There was none of that was being taught. And then these kids then go off to college, and they're eating in the dorm or in the cafeterias, they're drinking, they're doing all of this stuff. And whereas my kids, I'm not saying my kids are perfect and that they don't go eat the processed foods and drink once in a while or whatever, but they think through their decision. They feel their body. They will understand when they eat too much sugar, how it makes them feel. And there's this connection so that they're in charge. I grew up in a house where I had a very early, oh my gosh, I had to come home early. What am I saying here, Katie? And my kids I don't ever ask them when they need to come home. They tell me what they're doing, and I trust them. And why? It's because I taught them early on their limitations and their boundaries. So they actually want to come home at an early time and know when they need to go to sleep, to get up, and their restrictions are internal instead of coming from me. So with that being said, there's this relationship that we create with our kids. How do you describe gaining respect from your children without being that crazy mom who is going against the norm? Because you are not the norm.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that also comes from the place of, like you just talked about, having those early conversations with them, building into the family culture, things like obviously respecting their autonomy, which we talked about, but core things like we're in this family, we're curious and we're constantly learning, and having conversations around that, listening to their their voice in those conversations and respecting it. And like, I would say with teenagers, it's also being where they are, kind of like they don't tend to want to have those deep conversations, unfortunately, during normal business hours. They want to talk at like 10 o'clock at night after they get home. And so staying up late and being there for those conversations with them when they want to talk. But I think respect is, even in kids, earned. And I think a lot of parents approach it with that their kids must respect them because they are the parent. And I try to turn that on its head and say, our children are their own infinite autonomous beings. We have to earn their trust and respect, just like they're earning ours through the course of their childhood to have more freedom when they're teenagers. And so treating them that way, I think how we model in our conversations with them, how we model in our daily actions, I think, like you talked about earlier, for moms, having our own, like focusing on our own health and nervous system regulation and mental health is a huge gift to them. And that by modeling it, we give them permission to be able to do that as well. So it's not only not selfish for us to work out or to prioritize the things that help us regulate and get enough sleep or whatever those pieces are for us. It actually is vital and gives them permission and an example of doing that in their own lives, and then still giving them the chance to make the decisions that let them fail at those things once in a while and feel how they feel when they don't get enough sleep or when they eat the food that we wouldn't have fed them or make choices in teenage years that we wouldn't have made for them. That's part of the learning process. And I think when they feel and get reinforced over and over that we do respect them, that they are their own infinite person, and that's built in, that those conversations and everything coming from that become a lot easier. And as an example, I'll say a couple ways that's played out in my house is right now my kids currently have an X Prize that they are running themselves around healthy habits. And we occasionally will do this if we want to learn a new skill as a family. I'll put like a small amount of money as an X Prize, and then they all go sort of like learn and compete for that. But they did it this time on their own, and they made a list of sort of like healthy habits, realizing this is the time of year when people often get sick, when healthy habits fall by the wayside with the holidays. So they made a list of things like going to bed and on time, getting morning sunlight, walking for half an hour each day, eating enough protein. And they're having their own fun internal competition around those things. And as a byproduct, they're also really integrating these healthy habits even more so. So I feel like when they're given the autonomy, they often use it in really amazing ways. Another example would be, I came home from a podcast day one time, and don't just help me around the house, like I talked about, they valuably contribute to the house. And I had sort of built a system around keeping the kitchen clean that they had all been working in to keep the kitchen clean together. And I came home from podcasting one day, and they had a roundtable meeting, the 6 of them on their own, and decided like we could probably make this kitchen system more efficient. And so they had reorganized it, made a breakdown of people having entire meals versus individual jobs like unloading the dishwasher, and they built a whole IOU barter system around it. And they basically told me like, Mom, we've reimagined the kitchen system. You're not doing dishes anymore. We have it all covered. These are all the meals, how we're doing it. It lives on our refrigerator. And for the last year and a half, they have done that without me reminding anybody to do the dishes, without it being my emotional responsibility at all. And they took that initiative. Even the idea didn't come from me. And so I think when we can reinforce over and over that we do respect and trust them, they rise to that because they actually they feel their own value and their own worth.
Oh my gosh, I love this. And it's something that I've instilled in my house because since they were young, I've said, look, Dad goes to work all day. I have a job. I've got a lot on my plate. We are a team. We work this house. We all contribute to. We all have our chores. When my son comes home from college and he's been living on his own for 6 months, and then he comes home to live in the house, it's hard for him to get back into the routine of, oh, I've got to contribute because he's been on his own, taking care of his own stuff. But that is a system, and it's amazing when the kids feel that bond and that contribution. My kids do the marketing. As soon as they turn 16 and they could drive, they do the marketing. Why? Because they're contributing to the house, but then they're also making that mental note of, oh my gosh, that junk food actually costs a lot of money. And I'm going to go see how prices are at Trader Joe's versus the expensive Whole Foods, or how can I make more economical decisions with my food? And now I'm valuing the food that I'm putting in my body more because I'm seeing how much it costs and how much supplements that my mom sells makes money, and putting those things together. And that teamwork is amazing for helping them then take that teamwork mentality off into the real world. And I can tell you that I get compliments all the time when my kids are at other people's homes, because they are the first to get up and to clear the dishes or to do that. And there's so many moms out there that do the laundry, do all the marketing, do all the dishes because they think that's their job. Or they think that, I only have so many years of these kids in this house that I want to do this for them. But what they don't realize is they're stealing this value from them and cutting off their wings for when they go off. When my son went off to college and he was excited to go, I said to him, I would be really concerned if you did not want to leave my house. That meant that I didn't do my job. Yes, I'm going to miss you, but I need you. I want there to be a little bit of tension that you're so independent that you're ready to go be yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And my oldest is only 17, but I already see that with him. And I also know he would be totally fine on his own as a fully functioning adult now. And so the beautiful part of that is, like you touched on earlier, our relationship has shifted to a point where we actually have kind of moved into a sort of friendship because he is responsible. I don't have to really parent or limit him at all. And so now we have more of a friendship relationship where he still wants to have the conversations. And I know he's going to be fine when he's off on his own. And I love that he isn't, in a rush to do that before he's 18. But it's really fun when that shift happens, and it's built on all of those smaller decisions and micro moments throughout childhood.
Yeah, and it's fun because all of my kids they're my best friends, and it's so much fun. But this brings up the topic of parents that want to just be friends with their kids. And I think, like we're talking, at a certain age, that's appropriate. But what would you say to parents with younger kids that just want to be friends and be the cool mom? What risks are they taking?
Well, I think it's often just that I think that intention is awesome, but often the actions we think that are going to contribute to that might actually be counterproductive to that end. Because if you had a real life adult friendship with one of your friends where you were doing everything for them and you were doing their laundry and you were making their meals and you were cleaning up after them, that wouldn't actually feel like an actual friendship. That wouldn't feel balanced. And eventually you might even get resentful. I mean, we even hear from that, of course, in couples where there's like sort of an imbalance there and one can get resentful over time because one is doing all the hands-on work and the other is not. And so just like in our relationship with our kids, I understand entirely the intention of wanting to be their friend. I would just preface that perhaps the actual way to accomplish that is by respecting their autonomy and having expectations and boundaries around that, because we would do that in adult romantic relationships. We would do that in adult friendships. We wouldn't want to be friends with someone where we were just doing everything for them. And they probably wouldn't feel valued in the friendship either if it was that one-sided. And so if you start from the mentality side of it, you realize that relationship is built on these principles. And the best way to become friends with our kids is by having these things built into family culture, by respecting their autonomy, by letting them rise to the challenge of what they're capable of doing, because that's what we would value in any friendship.
So I want to switch to the topic of siblings. You've got 6. So this has got to be a big conversation in your home. How do you force or encourage all of the siblings to get along?
I probably have maybe a little bit of a countercultural approach to this as well. I would say on an individual level, when it comes to their interactions with each other, with friends outside of our house, with their food choices, I try to, whenever possible, like I said, not be the outside regulating force, but help them hone their own internal compass around that. And so I ask them a lot of questions. Even if they ask me a question, instead of answering it directly, I'll often get Socratic and ask them what they think and have them learn to tune into their body. And when it's an interaction with a sibling or with a friend, I try to also encourage them to put themselves in the shoes of the other person and ask what they think and ask what they think the other person might be feeling or what emotions are happening there. But even amongst my kids, I don't often, only if it's absolutely necessary, will I regulate from the outside their interactions, because I think siblings are actually a perfect place to learn some of those dynamics of interaction. And that, for instance, like if they get in a fight with each other, they might say hurtful things to each other. That might happen in adult life too. And so this is like a safe zone for us to learn those lessons and then get to talk about them after. So I don't often try to interfere or shut down sibling relationships as much as try to guide them. And certainly they don't all get along all the time, but also respecting their choices in how much they want to interact with their siblings and realizing there's going to be times when a couple of them may not want to hang out all the time and that those phases usually pass, but to be more of the guide in conversation around it versus the external regulating force within it. And that extends to friends in the neighborhood too. And the little spats kids have, or the disagreements about what they're going to play, or when the rules of a game don't go the way they thought or whatever, to just be there as the guide and to have conversation, but not to step in and regulate. And I've seen this, especially on the neighborhood side. I know some parents have a much different approach, and often I've seen parents go get involved in a conflict with kids or be texting the whole neighborhood thread of this kid did this and this kid did this, and can you tell your kid to not do this? And I try to, even in those conversations, be the voice of returning it to the kids' autonomy, and let's all be great guides and examples for them, but not step in and end the game in the street that they're playing just because one kid feels like it's not fair. Let's let them get a chance to play this out in real life and then be the ones to help them talk it through later versus putting ourselves in the middle of those kid relationships.
I love how you said asking them to put themselves in the other person's position, because I know people in my life who have blamed everyone other than their own child for a problem. And they now are adults with no friends. And there's a reason, because they played the victim all of their life and it was never their fault. And every time my kid comes home with a problem like that with another person, I will say, what did you do to cause that? Is there anything you did? Okay, well, if there's not, then maybe this is not a match. Maybe this is not a person that you should stay around with. Maybe they're fine, they're a good person, but they're not a match, and that's okay. So I love what you're saying, because that gives them ownership and them their own tools. And I truly believe family, and especially siblings, are there to teach you how to work in the real world, because the real world isn't going to give you a chance if you're going to be acting like a jerk, right? So you're going to learn those lessons in the home. We've got about 10 minutes left. Social media. This is something that we didn't have to deal with when we were growing up. And it's a whole new world. And it's an uncharted world as a mom. What are your rules and feelings about social media with the kids?
Yeah, you're right. We're the first generation of parents who are having to figure this out. And it, like you said, didn't exist for us at that age. I'm, in hindsight, very grateful that Facebook didn't exist when I was in high school and that my high school life is not documented online anywhere. I think that too, it starts with a lot of conversation first and foremost, and realizing that they are, just like with food, extremely capable of understanding, even at a young age, and not avoiding those conversations, but having the conversations well in advance of their actual experience and interaction with social media or with the online world in general. I have two things that I do specifically on the technology piece. One is that because entrepreneurship is a big part of my life, I have a contract with each of them individually that they have to have a successful business for a year before they can have their own phone or car, because I think there's a whole lot of life lessons that are learned through entrepreneurship. And it's also a great time where you get to try things and fail things. And I love them getting to do that while they're still here in my house, and I can help guide them through the process. And so that also has meant, just on a practical level, most of them are not getting a phone at a really young age. But also being in the online world, I realize technology is something that is an integrated part in all of our lives, and it is not likely to go away. We're not likely to see it go the opposite direction, short of some massive event that would change things. So this is something that they're going to need to manage in their own lives. And that doesn't start at age 18, just like it doesn't with food choices. And so looking at, to whatever degree possible, still honoring their autonomy in that, and having them be involved in the conversation and contribute to it if there's are limits that naturally make sense, whether it be filtering out certain things they might encounter online, whether it be time limits around how much time that they're spending on it, but trying to, as much as possible, let those be internal decisions for them versus things I'm externally mandating that they're going to want to rebel against. And so we have a lot of open conversation around that, but I don't, in most cases, directly limit their access to technology or social media. And the irony is, I find that because I'm so integrated in the online world because of business, they actually, and I think we're seeing this with a lot of the younger kids right now, are choosing to not want to be on most social media. Mm-hmm. Or if anything, they're on like Be Real, where it's just a picture and it's not people commenting on things. I think they're consciously choosing to do less of that. And I think we see this sort of trend with every generation as well. Like, I wasn't allowed to get my ears pierced, so I had so many piercings, and now my kids think piercings are not cool because I have them, or whatever it is. And so I think they are actually capable of making really good choices, and they might surprise us as a generation by choosing to be much more conscious of their technology use, even from a young age, because they've seen us all learning in real time how to interact with technology and social media as adults. And so I think it's just like anything, goes back to honoring their autonomy whenever possible and having the conversations that they're getting to make the internal choices for responsible use. And in most cases, they might actually surpass our expectations in their ability to make great choices around that when we build those pieces in.
I love what you're saying, because I think that not just with social media, but I think that whole principle is applicable to the food, to the friend choices, to business, to school, and their ability to study and actually take ownership of their grades. All of that stuff it's really all about giving them the tools and taking ownership. And I've said multiple times to my own kids and friends with kids that have gone through, boyfriend breakups, or getting an F on a test, or whatever it is, you want them to fail while they're in the home, because you're there to not pick up the pieces for them, but to teach them how to pick up their own pieces and give them the tools. And my middle daughter, freshman year in college, I told her, I said, there is no one more ready to go off to college than you, because you have gone through so much in high school, and you've had to pick yourself up and develop the grit and perseverance like no other person. And it's true. And it's so funny because she's my first daughter to leave the house. I have not shed one tear because I'm so excited for her to be out on her own, and she's thriving because she has the tools that she learned from at home. And I'm just so impressed that your children are becoming entrepreneurs at such a young age. So can you give us one or two examples of what that looks like and at what age?
Yeah. So my son had his first business, my oldest, when he was 12. And I think from seeing what I was doing in business, he like took some ideas and then made it his own. So he got a few of his friends together, and they, without any parental help, wrote a cookbook for kids that taught them how to cook real food, pitched it to publishers, got a publishing deal, published it, photographed it. They did all of the pieces. And it's now on Amazon, and it outsells my cookbook, which I absolutely love. And then others have had micro businesses. A couple of them have done local things where they've created like management companies and cleaning companies for local properties. They've done like handmade goods businesses where they're selling things like that. So they've all done it in lots of different ways. And even the younger ones now sort of think along those lines at a younger age, which is, of course, something we also see with our kids is like, because of example, the younger ones tend to do everything earlier. And so now my little ones are already kind of thinking like that, even at 7 and 10.
Oh my gosh, I love this. I love this, love this. Lastly, what does your day look like as an entrepreneur, as a mom, as a wife? What does your day look like?
It does vary a little bit every day, especially with balancing the business owner part as well. So, for instance, Mondays are typically my podcast days. So, those are a non normal day where I'm podcasting all day. And I try to batch a lot because I feel like from a time perspective, that helps. So, I even batch things around the house, like bulk cooking and podcasting and all of those things. But most days, I follow we have a family wake up time of 7 a.m. So I'm usually up a little before that, but everybody's awake around 7. And we do the morning routines of morning sunlight, movement outside, usually making breakfast. At 9 o'clock, I homeschool as well. So they start working on schoolwork, which is usually 9 to 12 and is our school block. So they're working on their school stuff. And then that's when I'll get a lot of work done typically, whether it's house stuff I need to do or work stuff I need to do. And then usually we have family time around lunchtime and in the afternoon until all the kid activities hit with pole vaulting and tennis and all the things that happen in the afternoons. We try to prioritize family dinner whenever possible. And the data around that is actually really fascinating as well. Like if you want one thing to focus on for healthy habits, make as many meals at home as possible. But statistically, even just making 3 meals a week, like not all 3 meals a day, but just a week, has a statistically valid, noticeable difference in kids' health outcomes. So we try to prioritize that whenever possible. And then evening routine, dependent on activities and where everybody is. We usually try to do like wind down time. Everybody goes to bed at sort of different times, but that's often great conversation times with the teenagers. And if I have a few more work things I need to do, I'll do it sort of in those evening hours. And we also try to finish eating. It's not as possible in the winter, but by about sunset, and stick to sort of a circadian rhythm of eating. So we're finishing up dinner, cleaning the kitchen, all those things happen early. So there's more free time and downtime at night. And then I have like all the stuff I do for my own health, like workouts and supplements and anything. Those are all kind of blocked into the day, depending on what the daily schedule is. But in general, it's much less hectic than you would maybe expect with 6 kids in a household. And I think that's partially because, like we talked about, they're involved and actually contributing. And everything is pretty structured and scheduled for me, at least, because I only control me as the variable. And sort of everything has its time and its place. So that I feel like in general, I don't have much overwhelm and stress, and there's less chaos than you might expect in a house with this many people.
Well, I think that's because of what we went back to is intention, and everything that you're doing is so intentional that it keeps the peace. And it's just amazing. And I commend you for all you're doing. And it is truly an inspiration. And hopefully people are getting a lot from this. I really encourage all of you to go and check Katie out on her podcast. Will you tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm Wellness Mama everywhere online. So everything lives on wellnessmama.com. And the podcast is also Wellness Mama Podcast. So and social media, I'm Wellness Mama everywhere as well.
It's very few people out there are like you and doing such an amazing job with intentional parenting, especially today. And our kids are our future. And this generation, it's really sad what's going on as the pandemic truly is in our children's health and wellness. So thank you, Katie. And you guys all can find me on her show as well. We did a podcast and I'll be on there as well. So thank you, Katie. And thank you everyone for joining us today. If I can help you with your health issues, contact me directly through the website, sarabantahealth.com. Happy to put together a protocol for you. Join the free group coaching on Telegram with the link below. I teach you on a daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health, and you'll be a part of a like-minded group to support you on your health journey, in addition to truly taking control of your health. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram under Accelerated Health Products, across over 100 channels under Accelerated Health TV and radio show. And like I mentioned, my goal is to reach everyone on earth with eyes to see and ears to hear my message of healing. So help me with that goal. Share this podcast with a few of your friends who may need my help. Join us every week, Mondays at 2 p.m. Pacific, Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, and you can find the supplements that I promote and the podcast at sarabantahealth.com. Use coupon WELCOME10 for 10% off site-wide. Thanks again for joining us here, and have a great week.